Welcome to all our listeners. Great Sources, Season 2, Episode 20. Today's share is called, Must We Rectify the Problem that the Mitzvahs Athluyos present before we can return? The subject of the share is quite obvious from the title. Before we get into the share, I want to tell all our listeners a very important message. The shiurim are now available on Kol Halashon. Here's the information for getting the shiurim on Kol Halashon. Obviously, you can go to the website. If you want to call, the number is 718-521-5231. Press *7, and then the code is 912147, which I'm going to post this also in the episode description here in the podcast. People have been asking about the ability to download shiurim, which is apparently difficult or impossible from the podcast, from the online. So you have to listen while you're online, and people have been asking about whether it's possible to download them and then listen at their convenience. And I understand that that can be done from the Kol Halashon website for those of you who would like to do that. So, and of course, you can also listen by phone. So today's shir, what we're going to do is we're going to continue the conversation, the diyan, in Shita of Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen. As we discussed last week, Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen comes along in Taisus Subistaf Kofrin of Beis and says that Achshov, now, there's no mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael because there are many mitzvahs of Athluyos Baretz and many onshim that we can't be careful about and we can't fulfill. And therefore, says Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen, Achshav, there's no mitzvah. And as we discussed last week, this shocking statement brought a certain response from many Achronim, which we discussed. Chedushim Marit says, Davar Tema. Many mitzvahs that you can be Mekayim. Why shouldn't you be able to be Mekayim then in Eretz Yisrael? And then he says, Lest the Chosh Lahoder Chaim Zal. There was no one who was choshish for this as a halachic shita. The Shalah also says, Lo Mistaber Taimei. And he says, this Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen says, Ein Yichon Nizar Behen, Zeh Hadover, Ein Moven Etzli. The Loma Ein Yichon Nizar, Omiyu Hamenea. Why can't we be careful? Who's stopping us? Al kein ein lahashgiach, says the Shalah. Al kein ein lahashgiach b'dvar ein. These words can be disregarded. So it's a very strange thing. Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen says, Achshav ein yichon nizar, there's no mitzvah, and Haggadas Yavit says, heaven should forgive Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen for saying such a thing. To be mevatel, arguing on the Mishnah and the Gemara, but mili d'chadi, just words that he made up. And how could he say such a thing? What type of business is that? To use these kinds of arguments and to be mevatel a Mishnah and a Gemara. So regarding the question, this was spoke last week, regarding the question of what Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen means that we can't be nizar, why can't we be nizar? We spoke last week, but we dealt with at length. We dealt with 3 of the 4 mahalchim in Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen, and today we're going to get to the 4th, a very interesting one. The 3 mahalchim were Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen. He was talking about l'shaitoi. During his time in the 12th century, it was nearly impossible to survive in Eretz Yisrael and to be mekayim the mitzvah of Baretz, either because of the reality on the ground or because the halachas weren't studied for a long time, and therefore there were questions and they weren't developed. This is how many Achronim learn Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen, and the Achshav means in his day something unique to his tekufa. The other way to learn Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen regarding this question of why can't people be nizar is that he doesn't mean that individuals like the Shalah and like the Mabit can't be nizar, like the Marit. He means to say that the general populace is not holding by the level that they're going to be careful about the mitzvah of the Baretz. And therefore he holds that there's no mitzvah when the Hamoin Am is not holding by that. The third way, well last week it was the 4th I think, but which I'm saying the 3rd now because I'm going to get back to the next one, Be'iyam today. was that Rabbeinu Chaim Cohen actually holds that you cannot revive a mitzvah from books. And since the mitzvah atluis ba'aretz were not practiced for such a long time, maybe Rabbeinu Chaim Cohen holds that we can't trust that we can get it right by merely studying the books and trying to reinstate those mitzvahs, understand what they mean in practice, given that there was this major lapse in practice. And that might be the answer to the question of the Maharit and the Shalah, who's stopping you. The answer is, well, actually, it's very complex, and with the fact that the practice stopped for such a long time, makes it, in Rabbeinu Chaim Cohen's opinion, close to impossible that we're going to get things right, and therefore we're not supposed to do it. Or at least there's no mitzvah. Very important. Rabbeinu Chaim Cohen doesn't say this is to live in Eretz Yisrael, but he says it's no mitzvah. Now, today I want to discuss another mahalach of Rabbeinu Chaim Cohen, which I mentioned briefly last week. And as we shall see, this is a very interesting idea. The idea in a nutshell, which I'm going to show you through putting together various medrashei Chazal, the idea goes as follows. As we shall see, in many midrashim it says that the Golas, and of course when we talk about the Golas, we would mean the Golas of the Bayis Rishon. So as we've discussed in the past, the Bayis Sheni was just a temporary reprieve and never really undid the Golas. We're still dealing with the Averis of Golas Rishon. But the Midrashim says that the Golas happened ba'avoin maisros. The Golas happened because of a bittul in the mitzvah atluis ba'aretz, and which is a chiddush, as we shall see, and what the Midrashim say also is that the return to Eretz Yisrael 70 years later from Golas Bavel could only take place while they in a situation where they rectified the problem of the mitzvah atluis ba'aretz. Meaning, given that Maisus proved to be a challenge that the Anshe Bayis Rishon, let's call them, did not live up to go back 70 years later and say, okay, here we're back, let's do it again, would have been insanity. Why would you go do the same thing again if you know that there's a fault, there's a chasaron, an inability or an imperfection, at least in your ability to uphold and fulfill the mitzvah atluis ba'aretz. To go back 70 years later and to fall into that same problem would make sense. And in fact, they didn't go back until they dealt with that problem. And as we shall see, that you can argue that the way they dealt with that problem no longer helps us today, and therefore we shouldn't go back due to the problem of mitzvah atluis ba'aretz. And the shift over here, and this is why it's very important, this idea, in terms of understanding of Rabbeinu Chaim Cohen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through Midrashim and show you these ideas, and I'm going to tell you that, and then I'm going to show you how this perhaps is what Rabbeinu Chaim Cohen means. And what makes it very significant is that Rabbeinu Chaim Cohen is unlike what the back of Emden accuses him of saying, Mili dechadi. Rabbeinu Chaim Cohen perhaps did not make up this and look around and observe and say, you know what, I think that we can't do the mitzvah atluis ba'aretz and if there's no mitzvah. It might actually be a very elaborate Havana and putting together of all these midrashim, which teach us something about why we were exiled, and therefore under what circumstances we are supposed to return, and therefore under what circumstances we're not supposed to return. So Rabbeinu Chaim Cohen is not coming from Mila Dechadi. It's actually a lomdus that develops from a tziruf of various midrashim. Now, here are all the midrashim. What I'm going to do is, if you have the source sheet in front of you, then it's definitely a good time to look at these midrashim, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And what I'm going to do is give you a basic summary of what it says in these midrashim. That's from the Medrash Tehillim to Tanchuma, to Medrash Rabbas, Sefri, and others Derbanos. So, starting with the Medrash Tehillim, what it says is that when that Klal Yisrael went to Golos, again Bayis Rishon, because they were Mavatal Maisros. Now, stop right there for a moment. The fact that the Medrash says that they went to Golos due to Maisros is very strange, because the Gemara in Shabbos, and this is if you have the source sheet, we're jumping ahead now to 11 and 12. The Gemara in Shabbos talks about what happens b'avoid maestris. When Shabbos Dafam Beis talks about what happens, what the punishment is for Averis. Punishment for maestris is not Golos. And the mission of it that talks about why Golos happens tells us the usual suspects, and it doesn't say maestris. So what's going on with these midrashim, and there are a bunch of them, that say that the Golos happened due to maestris. Just something to know. So the Medrash Talmud says they went to Golos because of maestris. It's not just that Golos was a punishment for maestris. By going to Golos, they became potter for maestris. Firstly, because they're not in Eretz Yisrael, so there's no chiv maestris outside of Eretz Yisrael. But also, Eretz Yisrael itself lost its kedusha when they were goyla from Eretz Yisrael. The kedusha rishayna was kitchel shayna below kitchel slav. It's machlekes abiyasi and the rabbanon about the kedusha shniya. That means the kedusha in the Bnei Ezra. Was it the kedusha deraisa and it's eternal, or as we'll see, we're jumping ahead of a moment over here. Let's go back to the Medrash and you'll see exactly how it comes together. So the Medrash says they went to Golos because they were vatal maestris. When they were goyla, they became potter from maestris. When they came back to Eretz Yisrael, kimu oisan me'atzvan. That means even when they came back to Eretz Yisrael, they didn't become chayiv in maestris mid deraisa. This Medrash is saying, which is the shita of the Rabbanon. Rabbi Yossi holds kedusha shniya of the Bnei Ezra was mid deraisa and it was eternal, still is chal today. And the Rabbanon hold the kedusha shniya b'nei Ezra was only the Rabbanon, as it says here in this Medrash. It's a question about it, but that's in this Medrash. That the kedusha shniya b'nei Ezra was only the Rabbanon, and they were mekabel upon themselves. So they went to Golos because they were vatal maestris. When they were goyla, they became potter from maestris. When they came back from Ezra in the days of Ezra, they accepted it upon themselves, and Hashem agreed with them. Now, what the Medrash says a very interesting thing is that how were they mekabel upon themselves when they returned in Ezra? They said, "Bein shanu goylim, bein shanu oimdim, mekayim anu mitzvahs maestris." They accepted maestris when they came back to Eretz Yisrael after 7 years in Golos Bavel. They accepted maestris not only in Eretz Yisrael, they accepted that they'll take off maestris whether they're in Eretz Yisrael or not, which is very interesting. Soon see why they did that. And this is referring to the fact that Bavel is chayiv in maestris. The Mishnah Yadayim says that there was a Tekanos Hanavim that Bavel should be chayiv in maestris. We'll soon see later in this year that was batal at some point. But the Medrash is going that they were makabel to take off maestris in Bavel too. Now, point back, the Medrash continues and says, even though they accepted upon themselves to take off maestris by Sheni, with Rabbanon, they accepted upon themselves, they ended up being mavatal that. And for that, the Navi Malachi gives them Musar, you're stealing from God. Okay. Now, going further there, in the Tanchum of Aichi, where it says the same thing, there it says something very, adds a certain point, where it says, Bikish in the Tanchum of Aichi, it talks about the same thing, that when they went to Golos, they became potter from maestris, and when they came back, they accepted it upon themselves. And the Tanchum adds a very important point. It says, Bikish HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahatei olahem as maestris. Hashem wanted matim maestris. What did they do? They makabel it upon themselves, and Hashem was masking. So what the Medrash is saying is that the fact that the reason why they went to Golos is due to their laxity in maestris, there was a solution to that. The solution, Hashem's solution was, come back to that soul, but you won't be chayiv in maestris this time. Because the Medrash is going not like Rabbi Yossi again. Rabbi Yossi also, when they came back to that soul, they chayiv in maestris with the right. This Medrash is going that when they came back to the soul, really, they didn't have to be chayiv in maestris with the right. So it wasn't a true kedusha. There's only going to be another kedusha, loving Mashiach, but not being Ezra. And that was Hashem's plan. He invited them to come back after 70 years and come back and build a Bayis Sheni, but you won't be chayiv in maestris. So everything's going to be fine. You won't have that challenge of maestris, right? You won't have that challenge that you weren't able to live up to. But yet they were makabel upon themselves. And this is clear also in the Medrash Shvus Rabbah. It says, Ba'avoid Trumas u'maestris galu. And then it continues, Shemar B'yachon Kivin Shegalu Niftiru. B'heim Chivatz u'me'aleim. So that means the reason why they went to Golos is because Ba'avoid Trumas u'maestris. So once they went to Golos, they were potter. Meaning even if they come back to Eretz Yisrael, you're potter because once they left Eretz Yisrael lost its kedusha. But they went ahead and they were mechayev themselves me'eleh. Okay, those are those midrashim. And what we see in those midrashim is this idea that Hashem had a plan to deal with the maestris problem, the maestris challenge that they didn't succeed in achieving properly b'nei maestris. His plan was, okay, you'll become potter from maestris, come back there, so but be potter from maestris, so there won't be a problem. we, Kol Yisrael, said, no, you know what? We're going to accept Ma'aseh upon ourselves. And we have this interesting thing that they accepted Ma'aseh upon themselves, whether they're in exile or not. And we'll soon see why. Why did they makabel Ma'aseh when they came back there? So why was that the point in time where they were makabel to take off Ma'aseh even in Golos Bava when they came back? What's the reason for that? And why are they accepting Ma'aseh upon themselves when Hashem didn't want them to have the Chiyuv Ma'aseh? How to understand this? Before we get to that, I want to mention two other midrashim here. This is in Eicha Rabbah and the Oster of Nassim. In both Eicha Rabbah and Oster of Nassim, it tells us a different version of when there was a Chiyuv Ma'aseh above. Like I said earlier, there's a Mishnah Yadayim that says there was that Konas Anavim that they should take Ma'aseh above. When did this take effect? So we have these midrashim that say it took effect paradoxically when they came back there to all after 70 years, and they makabel Ma'aseh upon themselves. They makabel Ma'aseh bein goyel and bein she'enim goyel. In other words, when they came back there, so they makabel take Ma'aseh even in Bavel. Now there are these other midrashim that say that when they got to Bavel, the Nevi'im told them take off Truma or Ma'aseh. As Yirmiyah says, Hatzivi loch tziyunim, do the mitzvahs that make you mitzuyan, and the Sifri says, in Devarim on the pasuk of Vavadate Mehera, Me'al Ha'atzateva, and the pasuk continues saying, do mitzvahs. This is something so the Sifri says that even though you're in Galus, you should still do the mitzvahs, so that when you come back to Etzol, they're not chadashim. As Yirmiyah says, Hatzivi loch tziyunim. So according to this version of the Medrash, the Takonas Hanavim to take off Meiser in Bavel took effect not when they returned to Eretz Yisrael, but when they went to Bavel, the beginning of Galus Bavel. And the purpose was so that they should be in practice, they should be in shape, they should practice taking Meiser so they should be in shape for their eventual return to Eretz Yisrael. This is what it says also about Nasin, that the Nevi'im told them take off Meiser, and they said, why should we take off Meiser here in Bavel? The whole problem was we didn't take a Truma Ma'aseh now, telling us to take a Truma Ma'aseh in Bavel, okay, but the Nevi'im did it. So again, we have a question here. It's very important to keep the cheshbon here. We have a question here. At what point in history was this Takonas and Nevi'im take off Ma'aseh in Bavel? When did it take effect? Yeshayim it took effect when they came back to Eretz Yisrael and they makabel Ma'aseh upon themselves. The Darbana take off Ma'aseh in Eretz Yisrael. They were also makabel take off Ma'aseh whether they're in Eretz Yisrael or in Bavel. And there's another version that the Chiyuv Ma'aseh in Bavel took effect in the beginning of Galus Bavel, and the Nevi'im told them to take off Ma'aseh in order for them to practice and be ready to return to Eretz Yisrael. Those are the two versions. Yitachin Ma'id, that this depends on Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan. Rabbi Yossi holds, the Gemara says in Yevomis, Daf Pei Beis and Beis, this is there in this sheet. Rabbi Yossi holds that, like I was saying the whole time, that the second Kedusha B'nei Ezer was with the rice. There's two Yerushas, the Yerusha Shni B'nei Yerusha Benun, Yerusha Shni B'nei Ezra, they're both the rice, and that's it. Now the Kedusha Shni is Kitchel Shaita, the Kitchel Asad Lavoi, the Kedusha the rice, which remains forever. The Rabbanan hold, as you see in this Midrashim, and Taisus and Yevomis over there has such a tzad, but you see this Midrashim like that according to the Rabbanan, the Chiyuv Ma'aseh B'mei Bai Sheni Atzmai was B'Rabbanan. So now think about this. Bein Rabbi Yossi, Bein Rabbanan know, as the Mishnah Yadayim says, that there was the Konas Hanavim to take Ma'aseh in Bavel. When did this happen? According to Rabbi Yossi, it couldn't have happened when they returned to Eretz Yisrael, because when they returned to Eretz Yisrael, they became Chayiv Ma'aseh in Eretz Yisrael mid-Araisa. So therefore, according to Rabbi Yossi, it must have taken place when they went to Bavel, and the purpose of this Takana take Ma'aseh in Bavel was so that they should be in shape and ready to take off Ma'aseh in Eretz Yisrael when they eventually return. According to the Chachamim, that they returned to Eretz Yisrael and makabel Ma'aseh on themselves then in Eretz Yisrael, then we could say, as the Medrash says, that they were makabel when they got to Eretz Yisrael, they were makabel take off Ma'aseh bein goyel and bein she'enim goyel. When they were makabel take off Ma'aseh in Eretz Yisrael, they were also makabel at the same time take off Ma'aseh even in Bavel. So when did the Takana and Sanavim happen? Take off Ma'aseh in Bavel, very likely is told in Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yossi and Rabban. Now, what is this all about? Meaning, let's think about this. Again, what's happening over here is, as we said, you can't just repeat the same thing again. You have to figure out how you're going to fix your problems. So Hashem exiled us because we didn't do Maasros, right? That's what happened. So according to one version, which we're saying maybe is okay. See, the Nevi'im said in Golos Bava, look guys, if you want to be able to go back to Eretz Yisrael and live up to what's demanded of you, you better start practicing now, because look, you didn't take off Meiser, that's what they call it. So here we have 7 years to practice in Babel, and they made it takana to take off Meiser in Babel, so that you'll know how to do it, and you'll be able to take off Meiser, and you'll be able to go back to Israel and not make the same mistakes. Okay. According to the Chachamim, they went back to Eretz Yisrael, and they were makabel Meiseris on themselves in Eretz Yisrael. And at that same point in time, they were makabel to take off Meiser in Babel too. Now, what does that mean? We said the Medrash says Hashem's plan to deal with the problem of Meiseris, to deal with the fact that we didn't take off Meiseris and Bayis Rishon. Hashem's plan was to pater us from Meiseris. We came back with a different plan. We'll be mechayiv ourselves in Meiseris, whether we're in Eretz Yisrael or we're in Babel. Now, how does that take care of the problem? How does the fact that we're capable to take off Meiseris in ourselves, a bein goylem, bein she'enim goylem, how does that deal with the problem? So, I want to just suggest, put forth a few ideas of what's the purpose of being makabel Meiser on ourselves, whether we're in Babel or not, when we got back to Eretz Yisrael, and suggest how that solved the problem of how can we go to Eretz Yisrael? Aren't we going to not take off Meiseris again? And again, we're going to be exiled from Eretz Yisrael. So I want to suggest 3 different mahal. Either, as the Medrash says, ba'avoyin Meiseris they were goyla from Eretz Yisrael, but in Bayis Sheni, since we were makabel that the chiv Meiseris should be upon us, bein be'Eretz Yisrael, bein be'Bavel, so it will no longer be Mida Keneged Mida that we should go to Golos and Bavel, which is the right place for us to go to Golos, as the Gemara says. We spoke about this. Given that even in Bavel is going to be a Chiyav Meiser. So we changed the calculus. In Bayis Rishon, we neglected Meisers, we relaxed in Meisers, and therefore we went to Golos. Hashem doesn't just want us to come back and be at the same quandary of we're going to not take off Meiser and he's going to exile us again. That doesn't make sense. So we said, you know what? We're going to make a different kind of Chiyav Meises that no longer totally in the Eretz, and it obligates us even in Bavel, such that the punishment for Meiser will not be Golos. And this is a great answer why the Midrash, why the Gemara in Shabbos and the Mishnah in Avos doesn't say that Meiser is punishable by Golos. Because, at least according to Rabbanan, that's no longer the case once there's a Chiyav Meiser in Bavel. It was once the case that Meiser is punishable by Golos to Bavel. But once we makabel the Meiser in Bavel, we're not going to be punished with Golos if we neglect Meiser. And that might be true even according to Yosef, because the fact is we were makabel to take Meiser in Bavel, so why would Hashem send us to Bavel for Bittul Meisers, where there's a Chiyav Bavel Meisers too? Hashem at time he could send us someplace else, but he likes to send us to Bavel again. There's reasons why the Golos was to Bavel. So therefore, the Gemara in Shabbos and the Mishnah Avos say different things that happen due to Meisers. No longer will the punishment be Golos. So by being makabel that Meisers shouldn't be told by Eretz, by being makabel upon ourselves that Meisers should be a Chiyav bein Baretz bein Bavel, we short-circuited, as it were, this mechanism of Meiseris leading to Golos. Or you could say that we weren't able to take off Meiseris properly the first time. Perhaps that's because Meiseris was originally a mitzvah Kliya Ba'aretz, and given that we didn't understand the Aretz properly, because we're still dealing with the Chet Meraglim, we weren't able to live up to the Chiyav Meiseris. By making Meiseris not be totally next, or by making Meiseris be a Chiyav even in Bavel, we're shifting Meiseris from being an Oretz kind of mitzvah to being more of a simple tzedakah kind of mitzvah, and perhaps we thought therefore that we will be able to live up to it and we won't be mevatel it again. Second theory. Third theory is Hashem didn't want us to be chayav in Meiser b'Doraisa because that's going to be punishable by Golos. But Meiser d'Rabbanan is perhaps not punishable by Golos. It's not as bad, so we're willing to makabel it upon ourselves. Why then, according to the third theory, we have to accept it bein ba'aretz Yisrael bein Bavel? I don't know. Okay, tzarich exactly what the point was in the makabel it in Eretz Yisrael and Bavel and how that solves the problem. But Harry gave you a few ideas. Now, Agav, as you mentioned earlier, this is an interesting point. The Medrash says that after they were makabel to take Meiser and Bayis Sheni, they ultimately neglected to do so, despite their Kabbalah. And what's interesting is, just this is a completely my Mahamuzga parenthetical point, what's very interesting is that we find the same thing in Yaakov Avinu's, in the story of Yaakov Avinu's return to Eretz Yisrael, where Yaakov Avinu said on his departure from Eretz Yisrael, in the beginning of Parashat Vayetzi, he said, he promised, Kol Halashon li asar asarenu lach. Build the base of the Kim and I'll take off Meiser. Now, what did Yaakov do? Did he take that Meiser? The Pirkei of the letter says Yaakov took that Meiser and gave it to Esav. He didn't fulfill his nether. And that's where the Malach came to fight with him, and came to him with a taina, you're making hekdesh choil, and this is a big problem. And because of that, Esav is mashal al Yaakov, Ba'olam hazeh. So the point is that just like Yaakov on his return to Eretz Yisrael has this nether of Meiser, which he unfortunately didn't fulfill, so too Yisrael, the nation of Yisrael, accepted upon themselves Meiser in the days of Ashini, and they didn't fulfill it. And if you want to, the truth is the parasha of Yaakov's return to Eretz Yisrael is the parasha of Klal Yisrael's return to Eretz Yisrael, and if you want to know how we need to return to Eretz Yisrael, that's the parasha to learn, because that's the Meiser and the for the return. That's just a Maimon script. Now I want to go back to where we stand today and how this could be our Rabbi Chaim Kai. So we have this whole idea, basically. In a nutshell, the idea is there was a Mises problem, Mises challenge that was proved to lead us to galus and troubles. We shouldn't go back to Eretz Yisrael until we deal with that, right? The way Hashem dealt with it was by partnering us. The way we dealt with it was by being Kabbalit Ben Goy Levation. So what's today? Where do we stand today? Has that problem been dealt with? So let's first talk about the way we dealt with it back in the day, which was to make a chiyuv ma'asos in Bavel too. Today, there's no chiyuv ma'asos in Bavel anymore. The Yishalmi in Chala Perek Daled says, the Yochanan says they used to take off ma'asos in Goyla, in Bavel, until the Rovim came and mevatel it. Who are the Rovim? The Sefer Yuchsin says it's a Bnei Rabchia. So let's go like that for a second. It's questionable. But let's say the Bnei Rabchia came and mevatel the chiyuv ma'asos in Bavel. Now I want to talk about that for a minute. It's Takonos HaNeviim. The Mishnah in Daim says it's Takonos HaNeviim. How are they coming and being mevatel Takonos HaNeviim? Well, why would the Nevi'im Masakin take off Ma'aser and Bavel? We have two ways. Either Masakin take off Ma'aser and Bavel when they first got to Bavel, as a means of preparing themselves as the Medrash, as the wasn't the other stir of lesson, as the Medrash in Eicha says, that Yirmiyah told them take off Ma'aser and Bavel to prepare for their return to Eretz Yisrael. The other version was that they were Makabel take off Ma'aser and Bavel so that their neglect to take off Ma'aser in Eretz Yisrael wouldn't lead them to Galus, as a way of being in Eretz Yisrael without being liable to exile for Bittul Ma'aser. They were Makabel Ma'aser and Bavel too. Those are the two Mahachim of the Knesset. So Yesh Lam are very pashut that the Bnei Rabchia, the Rovim, understood that after the Tkufa of Bagis Sheni was over, there was no longer a reason to take off Ma'aser and Bavel. If you take off Ma'aser and Bavel as a way of preparing to get to Eretz Yisrael, so good, during the 70 years of Golos Bavel, you're going to go back to Eretz Yisrael soon. Meanwhile, practice. Take off Ma'aser. Those who stayed in Bavel and didn't go to Eretz Yisrael right away, well, hopefully they still will go during Bayis Sheni, and therefore they also have to practice in Bavel and take off Ma'aser. But once the Tkufa of Bayis Sheni came to an end, which as we discussed in previous shiurim, obviously it's Korban HaBayis, but we discussed in previous shiurim that it could be in the days of Rav, at the end of the Shnei Alaf Torah, Akaparim, which work out the Tkufa of the Bnei Rabchia. Once that Tkufa came to an end, no one's expected to go back to Eretz Yisrael. The Pekida is over. They don't have a mitzvah. They don't have the invitation, I should say, to go back. And the Tzibur certainly can't go back because of the dangers of Aliyah B'chayim. So you shouldn't be practicing Ma'asos and Bavel when your return to Eretz Yisrael is not imminent. According to the other reason that they took off, that they were makabel to take Ma'aser and Bavel too, which is so that they could be in Eretz Yisrael without being liable to exile if they neglect to take Ma'aser properly. That's only relevant when they are supposed to be in Eretz Yisrael because of the Pekida. After the Tkufa of Bayis Sheni, again, when it became dangerous for all the Yidden to be in Eretz Yisrael, will be Aliyah B'chayim, will be dangerous. Then there's no need to take off Ma'aser and Bavel too. The whole reason to take off Ma'aser and Bavel is because, look, you want us to be in Eretz Yisrael. We're going to go to Eretz Yisrael because of the Pekida. And we're going to build the Bayis Sheni. And that's going to make us liable to exile from Mavato Maiser. So what we'll do is we'll take up Maiser and Bavel too. Kach, there won't be a Midah Keneged Midah that Hashem should exile us to Bavel if we don't take a Maiser and Etzor. That's only relevant at the time where we dafka need to be in Eretz Yisrael. But at the time where anyways most people can't be in Eretz Yisrael because it'll be Aliyah B'chaim, it'll be dangerous for everyone to go back, then there's no need anymore for there to be Maiser and Bavel. So that's why the Ravim understood to be Mavato. Okay, so now let's get back to Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen. Zok Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen, what about today? If you want to tell me to go back there, so right now we're walking into a trap because we were goyla b'avoin maises. We're not supposed to go back until we deal with the maises problem, as we see in the Midrashim. So in Mela, we can't go back. There's no mitzvah without dealing with the maises problem. That might be B'shan Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen. He's not really the chedi. It's all lumped. It's all putting together these midrashim. As it were, the haskava min hashamayim that we makabel maisis in Eretz Yisrael and makabel take maisis in Babel too is batel. It's batel. The whole idea was Hashem is willing for us to come to Eretz Yisrael and be chayiv in maisis because we mechayiv ourselves in maisis in Babel too. Once that's over, so you're going to go to Eretz Yisrael. You're not going to take off maisis. Chas v'shalom. You're going to be at risk of galus to Babel, to who knows where. Maybe even Babel's not even relevant anymore. Maybe now we're at risk of going to those other places which are not chayiv in maisis. There's no mitzvah. This is perhaps a pshat in Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen. But I want to go back to the question of the most important question: lahalacha. Lahalacha. Does this matter? Lahalacha is cheshbon. And lahalacha it doesn't, and that's because number one, we don't know that Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen meant this. Perhaps he meant, as we discussed last week, the most likely is that he meant in his time. It was impossible. He meant a very local thing. And as a purely halachic matter, such a massive chiddush to say that there's no mitzvah due to this, to the risk of mitzvah ba'aretz. We need obviously a rishon of Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen's rank to say this. We don't even know that he said it. He might have been talking about Rukaimai as the chidah, and Chazal Orbach, and I forgot who else we mentioned last week. Holds that Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen was talking about specifically the shaita. So that's the first thing. But of course, we have a question that, well, maybe Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen doesn't mean this, but this seems to be a very, very strong argument. Putting together all these midrashim, we have our own argument. They see from all these midrashim that you shouldn't go to Eretz Yisrael because the Mises problem is not fixed, and the way they fixed it back in Bayesheni is batal. What's wrong with this cheshbon? It's a good cheshbon, whether Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen meant it or not. Forget about what Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen meant. It seems to be a very compelling argument. But the truth is, if we look at these arguments on its merits, we'll see that they're not true, they're not correct, and for this reason, for some of the reasons that I'm going to tell you now, it also cannot be. For one of the reasons, the last reason I'm going to tell you now, it also can't be Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen. So I'm going to give you now 4 reasons why. Forgetting about Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen, 4 reasons why this whole shtickle Torah I'm telling you about the midrashim, about Maisris and everything, cannot serve as a reason why we shouldn't go to Eretz Yisrael today. Firstly, according to Rabbi Yossi, who holds that the kedusha of Bizman Bayesheni was midiraisa, and it's kitchel lasan love. According to him, there's no cheshbon that Hashem didn't want us back. With the chiyuv maisis, we went back to Yisrael, and there was a chiyuv maisis, and that chiyuv maisis is eternal. Kedusha shniya kitchel shaita kitchel lasan love, according to Rabbi Yossi. So we have no makar, according to Rabbi Yossi, for such an idea. Adarabba, Hashem took us back there, so as mechayvus, and we mechayv ma'asim v'deraisa, and that's nishar. So you see, he didn't have a problem with that. Unless you'll say, no, that's only because at the same time we happened to have already been chayiv in Bavel, but we don't find that anyway. There's no makar for that. In the Rabbanan, there's a makar, and the Rabbi Yossi is no makar, and it's machlekes v'shein had a pasuk, Rabbi Yossi or Rabbanan. Secondly, and maybe this is the most important thing, even though this is very compelling in all these midrashim, ultimately, the exact havana of what happened and why the Makal Maisis in Bavel is speculative. It's Asharis. I was telling you before that, maybe they wanted that they should be chayiv even in Bavel so that there won't be a midah keneged midah to be golos, or if it's on a mitzvah to be Baretz, then they could live up to it. So very nice, very Asharis, but you can't b'doicha a mitzvah, you can't prove you can't build a, that's a cool, you can't build a halacha based on these kinds of Asharis. it's going to get even more powerful. I'll tell you the Iker. I think the Iker Tainam is going to be the last one. The third thing I would say is that who says we can't go back to Eretz Yisrael and do Meiser? Who says we can't? The reason why in Bayesheni they knew they can't, as we discussed in previous shiurim, is because they knew they weren't being Masakin the Chet Meragim. And the reason why they weren't being Masakin the Chet Meragim, as we discussed, is because they didn't have an opportunity to redo everything from scratch, to start anew. If we today do have an opportunity to start anew, which I believe we do, then we should also view that as an opportunity, or consider it and view it as an opportunity to be able to take off Meiser properly, and not to inevitably do the same sins that they did in Bayis Rishon. Okay, that's a very big time, the Daikti. And fourthly, and this is the most compelling, the strongest argument. In other words, it's the most ironclad argument. The other ones I think are very strong, but this one is much. All we find in these midrashim is that when they went back to Eretz Yisrael, they dealt with the Meiser problem. How did they deal with the Meiser problem of Eretz Yisrael? Oh, by being misakin at the take of Meiser and Bavel too. Never do we find that they didn't go back because of the Meiser problem. Basically, in Bayesheni, they were going back. So Hashem's plan was, okay, there won't be a Chiyav Meiser. They don't like that plan. We don't like the plan. So we said, no, we'll do a Chiyav Meiser that's even a Chutz La'aretz. Okay, fine. No one said, don't go back. So if you're going to tell me, well, today also, we're not going to go back to Eretz Yisrael because we have a Meiser problem. Hashem's going to send us into exile. So you know what the answer would be? We should misakin take a Meiser in New York. We should misakin take a Meiser in Chutz La'aretz. Are you going to tell me we don't make takanis? Okay, so you don't make takanis. It's your problem. But loy matzinu that the problem of Meiser should tell us not to go back. Avadi should go back. We should deal with the Meiser's problem. Make the Meiser's problem not be a problem. But the emes is like this. The emes is to say that we should take off Meiser in New York is not so crazy. Why? Because as we discussed, according to Yossi, why did Yirmiyah tell them to take off Meiser in Buffalo? Because they have to practice. They have to be in practice. So 70 years later, they should go back to Eretz. They should be able to take off Meiser. If someone wants, let's say someone wants to go back to Eretz, someone wants to move to Eretz, hopefully in the next 20 years, hopefully in the next 50 years at the most. Avadi should get into practice, take off Meiser. Right? Not a crazy idea. So what am I saying then? Am I advocating that we should be Pasakin, take a Meiser from Zroim, etc.? No, because that takes obviously a much larger advocacy than me telling you that. What I am saying is, though, again, that you can't use these arguments to say we shouldn't go. You should only use these arguments to say we should make the Meiser problem not be a problem, like they did back in Bayesheni. Or according to BAC, we should practice. Okay, then we should take with Meiser. And this is where I want to end with actually a practical thing. Why is Meiser so difficult? What is it about Meiser that they couldn't do? It's not that, you know, Rabbeinu Chaim Kohen might mean the halachas are technical, halachas are problematic. But the reason why they move out the Meiser by Yisrish is not because halachas are problem. Because it's a great challenge to give away 1/10 of your crop. So, nearly that what we should do is, if you want to prepare to go to Eretz Yisrael, prepare people to go to Eretz Yisrael, and that shouldn't be a challenge, we should be very makbid on Meiser Ksuf. Because by taking off Meiser from our income, then we're preparing ourselves. And then also the same point, we're making that Hashem's not going to be maglas by in Meiser, because even in Chutz La'aretz take off Meiser, because we take off Meiser Ksuf. So I think that itself might solve the problem. It certainly puts us in the mode of being Zohir in Meiser, so be ready to go to Eretz. And certainly, as I said, the Meiser issue never stood in the way of going to Eretz. It just was an issue that we had to fix if we're going to be smart about how to return to Eretz. And we should be smart and fix it today also, if we had the power to do so. If we don't have the power to do so, doesn't mean we shouldn't go back to Eretz. And to a certain extent, I think we do have the power to do so because we could at least do Meiser. That's how we're going to leave it. And now we're up to a great milestone in the series. The next year, which is not going to be next week, I'm not going to put one up next week once Shabbos. It's Tisha B'Av. So it's going to be, we're going to skip a week, and it's going to be the week after. That Shir Bli Neder is going to be a great milestone, which is going to be a summary of all the shiurim until this point. Basically, a summary of all the various issues we discussed in this series. And Maskanas L'Maisa. Now we're up to that point. Maskanas L'Maisa, that will be either the next Shir or the one afterwards. There'll be one or two shiurim. And then I will explain to you what the idea of Eretz is all about, why it's so important, why is it the anchor of culture. Cool. So again, I want to remind everyone that the shiurim are now available on Kol Halashon. Please tell people that I know there's a lot of people, some people don't have access to the internet, or they're not able to listen to it constantly on the internet. Either way, please tell people who might be interested. It's available on Kol Halashon 718-521-5231. Press *7, and then the code is 912147. But I'm going to put that information also in the description of the episode. That will be all until next time.